Welcome to your Joyful Riches podcast, where you gain precious tips and tools on creating your beautiful, thriving life, even sometimes as we face adversities. And this podcast is delivered alongside the International Childhood Cancer Charity. And for this week, we are so honored and thrilled to have Anthony with us. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony. How are you doing today? Would you care to share with our audience what is it that you do?
Hey, Birgit, thank you for having me on the show today. So I guess a bit about myself and what I do. My background is in health and exercise sports science. So by trade or by career, I focus on health coaching. So working with individual clients based on like the sort of movement and modalities in that, but also working with, I also do like wellness coaching. And so a lot of my work is actually based around, as we spoke beforehand, about the hero's journey. So it's incorporating your personal narrative into in philosophy and belief system in someone to then give you, I guess, a greater perspective and purpose on life itself. So that would be the work that I tend to focus on. And I also work in the blockchain and Web3 industry. And so I do a bit of writing on the side for the last like 10 years. And so for people listening, I guess my work is centered around movement, but also combining that around the actual story and narrative around ancient myth and philosophy.
That is so awesome. That is so amazing. So all these things that you're able to do, in a way, they connect to each other. But there's so many beautiful things that you do. And you mentioned hero's journey just now. And would you care sharing with our audience in case some people say, "What the heck is hero's journey?"
Yeah, sure.
Sharing with our audience, what is hero's journey?
Yeah, so the hero's journey is I guess it's a monomyth. It's a storytelling framework developed by someone called Joseph Campbell. And so Joseph Campbell was a mythologist. And so what he did and what his purpose in life was, he drew upon different stories from the past. And so he would look at stories from Sumerian culture into ancient, Chinese traditions, but then also into Hindu philosophy, Buddhism, and Christianity as well. And he'd combine all these stories together, and he developed a single framework. So that's what I mean by monomyth. It's a framework that all these different stories use, and unites all those things together. And so this is then broken down into the 12 stages of the hero's journey. And so these go through things like the call to action, meeting the mentor, crossing the threshold, death and rebirth. And so a lot of great storytellers and people in Hollywood actually use this framework for creating movies and for comics as well. And so one of the most famous ones is Star Wars, and George Lucas. And so he actually hired Joseph Campbell to work on that film with him to develop the entire story. And so I can tell you a bit more about those different narratives and stuff, but essentially that will summarize the hero's journey. It's about the hero archetype, which is the individual, which is every single one of us, and how we go onto our own journey confronting the unknown. And so it's a story about transformation and how we can become our greater selves and our greatest potential. And it provides a framework on how to do that and how to live your life as the hero character.
Wow, that is amazing. That is wonderful to hear, in particular for that even the Star Wars. A lot of people know about the movie The Star Wars, but many times we watch with an entertainment and not realizing the message behind it is what I in there. And so what is the gist of hero's journey? Is it like everybody goes through life because
Yeah.
the calling?
Well, it's more like it's more about how to be, it's a self-realization or self-actualization. So it's also a framework on how you could kind of live your life. And so there's certain steps to take and certain, I guess, clues and patterns in life. And so that's one of the biggest things. It's actually a pattern of storytelling, a pattern of narrative. And so yes, this is applicable to actually stories itself. If you're writing, if you're marketing, a lot of marketing companies use the hero's journey or the archetypes to actually, to tell story. But then even greater than this, and I think what a lot of people now, people like Jordan Peterson and people, I guess, in a high intellectual sort of state, are now looking at how the world is actually formed from narrative itself. And so what I mean by that is actually we live in a story framework, and we live embedded in a narrative world. And so when I ask, look, for this podcast, you asked me about my story, where I came from, what I do. And so as humans, we're very much tied to storytelling. And so it's recognizing the pattern of the human psyche. And for a lot of us, I guess what the gist of it, what do you get out of it, is to uncover your true self. And so within all of us is a certain vision or this hero archetype. And what I mean by archetype, if people don't know what an archetype is, an archetype is a transpersonal character over time. And what I mean by that is it's a character that exists, it's eternal, it's actually alive, and it's greater than you. And so an example of this is the father, right? So one day I'll become a father, and there's certain ways of being a father, certain ways of acting as a good father over time. Then my son will become a father, and his son, and so on. And so the person playing the role passes on, but the role itself carries on through life. And so over time, as humans, we've actually recorded different attributes of what makes this character so special and unique, and what are the rules and social constructs around playing that character. And so, for example, taking on a CEO role or taking on a leadership role has elements of the father archetype, has elements of leadership to that. So it's like a sense of security that you need to provide, being understanding, being a good judge of character, leading the way. And so all these attributes are attached to certain. And so as humans, we're constantly looking for what characteristics and attributes can I attribute to myself. And the hero's journey would kind of give you, I guess, a framework and I guess a sense of certainty. If I act in this way, I will receive a certain outcome to it. And so, but the funny thing is that most of the time the outcomes, it comes from the unknown. You don't necessarily know. So it's like there's a I guess a certain type of faith you need to have to go on this journey. And the structure will tell you that itself. And so the very first step, it would be the call to action. And so the call to action is something that comes from chaos. It's something that comes from the unknown. And so relating this to Cancer, let's say you could be the everyday person, you're living a normal life, and then you get hit by cancer. So cancer would be the call to action in that sense, and how you now react to that. So your world has now changed. You're going to go through it's going to be a difficult time. And so how you now react to this is going to shape and change what happens in the future. And so if we look at the hero's journey and how to actually implement this, it would say that you need to willingly accept the unknown, or willingly accept the challenge, and say, okay, there's something in me that's greater than this chaotic force. And if I pull this thread and accept this journey, I will find out what that is. And I guess that's how you could use the hero's journey, but that's, I guess, a certain gist of it, if I can relate it to what we're talking about here.
Oh, that is interesting. I love how you say that the hero's journey is basically it's basically it's an opportunity for you to become a greater self of yourself. But from what you're saying just now, it started with chaos.
Oh yes, it always starts with chaos.
Yeah. It's always start with chaos. For many people, today, the world is in a massive chaos. Yeah. Seemingly with everything that is going on, whether for many people it's like the economy, the society, the war, it's like everything is just a chaos, and many people personal life are also in chaos. And so yeah. I love that how that is.
It doesn't mean that chaos doesn't exist, right? It's not like you can get rid of the chaos. It's a way of understanding that chaos is a part of the journey. It's if we look at yin and yang. So yin energy would be I guess a sense of chaos. It's the feminine, it's the creative spirit, and then yang is the action, it's the doing, it's the physical. And so it's also the tie between that as well. And so this is, if we look at narrative and story, we can see certain characters or certain characteristics that take place and how they shape the human psyche. And so if we're looking at chaos itself, and we look at this in terms of yin and yang, we can look at this in terms of masculine and feminine. I don't like to use the word chaos as much anymore because of, I think, like language is always evolving and society is evolving, and so there's different meanings around chaos now. And so when I say chaos, I'm using, I guess, the ancient term of like just the creative spirit. And so now I'd say creativity in modern day postmodern society. And so if we look at creativity and why that's attached to the feminine aspect is because females create, or the feminine energy is creative. And then the masculine energy is the energy of doing, it's action, it's got a different sense. That would be the yin and the yang. And so there's this constant play of chaos and order, regeneration, destruction and creation, destruction and creation. And so through having a greater understanding that this is actually all part of the play, it's part of the story. And so now you understand how to act in that situation. And that's really what it's about. It's understanding how can I act in the best way possible to yield myself a more meaningful and purposeful life, regardless of the circumstances that I face and regardless of the chaos that confronts me.
That is so beautiful, particularly like you said, when people are facing something that sometimes seems so big for us, whether it is or a major economic loss or war, something like that. It can be so easy to be stuck in it. To be kind of like, oh my God, this happened, and just like, oh, I can't do anything else, and so forth. It doesn't. Now we acknowledge the grief that can come from it, the heartbreak that can come from it. But if we sounds like from what you say, it's like if you see it as, like you say, then there is the dark, and it's always a dynamic. It's kind of like the sun rise and the sun set.
Yeah.
It's like in day and night and day. And I was saying to somebody, it was like here in the US, and I know other locations in the world as well, but here in Alaska, there are towns that has days of solid night, solid darkness, no sunlight for like several weeks at a time, because of their location, right, in winter. But even at the end of that, spring will come back. And then in summer, this same town will have sunlight for several weeks straight as well, with no darkness. Right? And it's kind of like when people going through things, from what I'm hearing, what you said, is like it's a dynamic, it's a harmony in a way.
It's a story, and it's also like a melody, right? It's a circular pattern. And so I guess a lot of what ancient mythology was doing in ancient cultures was they were tracking time. And so why would you track time? Because understanding what time you're in means you can understand how to act in a certain place. And so, for example, there's certain things you do in summertime. There's harvesting seasons. There's seasons where you for rest and recovery. There's times where you have to let go of things, and nature does this as well. And so it's about coming accustomed to nature and understanding that nature has a certain pattern and a certain knowledge to it, and it's about embodying that knowledge within yourself. So it's looking in terms of training. So what else I do with clients is looking at, okay, well, what food and what fruits available in what's in season, but then also what is the world telling you right now? So in summertime, I'm actually more active because when you look at the sun, it heats up the body. When you heat up the body, things expand, right? So if you at science, particles expand when you heat them up. And if you freeze things, they contract. And so that's also what your heart is doing, right? Your heart's always opening and contracting. Everything's going up and down. And so everything's breathing in some sense. That's another natural pattern. So there's certain flows in terms of what to do at certain times. And so in winter, I actually write a lot more. I journal more. I go more inward. Maybe meditation becomes more of a practice. And in summertime, maybe it's more of my fitness, my health. And because for me, I get down because I'm not very consistent, because I know everyone's trying to train all year round and be very active, and I'm like, I actually don't feel like being that active right now. I feel like going inward. And so I try to time these with the seasons. so that I have times of being active, times of being reflective, and I get a good balance between every single area. And I think that's ultimately what we're looking for, is understanding how do we achieve balance, because everything, right, even with looking at cancer, it's about homeostasis. It's how does the body actually find balance? And so understanding that everything is trying to find balance in its life. So, there's a certain amount of chaos, there's going to be a certain amount of order to follow. There's going to be this thing, and if things go out of, and so looking at the world through this lens, you can take a bit of a, you don't have to take things so personally, and accept, be like, okay, this is actually part of the journey. This is part of the story. And so how am I going to contribute? How am I going to show up as the hero character? How am I going to embody that character? And what would that character do in this certain moment? And so I think a lot of movies and stories are telling us this. And so as kids, we actually very much like this. My little nephew is running around like Spider-Man all the time. Why? Like, why is he running around like a superhero? Because there's some part of him that wants to, he wants to be that hero. And I think a lot of us need to come back to that inner child. And a lot of this work is about rescuing our inner selves and rescuing our inner child that had all these dreams and aspirations that maybe we shut down because we get older and society kind of led us down a certain path. But it's about reclaiming that. And you can definitely, I think that's a great healing. A great healing comes from that.
Yeah, that is, I can definitely be, it's allow us as a more neutral perspective, I would say, when you're able to remember that, instead of everything is ending, so to say, in the world when we're going to
100%. And that's another problem right there, is we think things are ending, and possibly even death. A lot of Western culture we look at as death as the end of reality, the end of life. And that's not certain in itself. And actually a lot of cultures believe in reincarnation and a cyclical pattern. And so, the world, the sun orbits the world and it's around, the earth is round, the seasons go around time, so I think things are more cyclical, or at least spiral in its purest form. And so I think life or consciousness would be some sort of reflective of that too.
Yeah, that is beautiful. That's very true. That is definitely very true. Now, you mentioned earlier personal narrative, and I understand what it is, but would you care sharing with our audience? We talk about how of your personal narrative can influence how you are as you navigate through things and even the outcome. Would you care sharing with our audience what do you mean by
personal narrative?
Personal narrative, in case somebody doesn't know.
Yeah, so your personal narrative would be, I guess, the common thoughts you're having every single day. What's your goal in life? What's your vision? What are you working towards? What story are you telling yourself? That would be some sort of your personal narrative. And what are your thoughts about yourself? What are your thoughts about your life? And so, and then, you could look at these things and see certain patterns in that as well. And then you go, okay, well, what character am I playing? And I think that's the big part of it, is like, am I the hero? Am I the Joker? Am I the Queen? Am I the King? Am I the villain? And how would the villain act in this? Am I a victim? These are certain characters that, and my belief behind all this, and I'd say more of a knowing now as well than belief, but is what character you play determines what happens to you in life. And so what I mean by that, and I think this is quite evident when you look at stories and movies, is if you look at the villain and you look at a hero, although you don't know what's going to happen in the movie, you kind of know the ending, like the outcome. That the hero is going to win and the villain's going to lose. That this certain character, something's going to happen to this certain character because of the way they're acting. And so, and the story they're telling themselves. And so I would always reflect on, okay, what narrative am I telling myself? What character am I playing? And then I can kind of project out the outcome. And then do I want that outcome? And if I don't want that outcome, where does that belief, where does that narrative come from? And so it's underlying, and a lot of it, this is what I believe we need to do, is come back to the hero archetype. And so I believe every single one of us has the hero archetype within them. And some of us might play another role, like a warrior. There's a whole bunch of different ones that we can kind of dive into. But I think the hero is something that we can all relate to. You have mother, father, but so in terms of, if we're looking at Christianity as well, you have the Trinity. So you have mother, father, and then individual, which is hero, or you have chaos, order, hero. So with everything there's duality, the hero is the centerpiece of that. So it's the one that balances the two. So he is the homeostasis, or he is the person who stands with one foot in chaos and one foot in order. And so I would question and look at my life and say, well, what character am I playing and what story am I telling myself? And so that would be like your personal narrative. And something really good that I heard from Joe Dispenza was like, your personality is your personal reality. And so what you see in the world is 100% determinant of the character you're playing or your personality. And so if you want to change your reality, you have to change your personality. And that comes through like reflection and questioning yourself and understanding why, what's your vision, where does your, and each character in a story has a different motive. And so that's what I believe, like, how do you actually determine what character you're playing? Was like, what are you pursuing in life? And what would the hero pursue in life? Am I pursuing money? And what kind of character would pursue money? Am I pursuing love? What kind of character would pursue love? Am I acting out of fear? Does a hero act out of fear? Yeah, he's in fearful situations and chaos, but he acts out of love, or she acts out of love. And so it's ultimately coming back to, what is the driving force? What is the motivation behind my choices? And am I afraid of the world, or am I accepting and loving of the world? And that's something that I think everyone could kind of answer themselves, but it's where I would start.
That is awesome. That's beautiful. Just like asking to realize that you are always, from what I gather here, for our audience, from what you say just now, that the hero, that you will always be in one foot in so-called chaos and one foot in harmony. And then it is up to us, and based from what you say, a lot of it is the story that we tell ourselves, what we see ourselves as, and whether you're going to get drawn into the chaos, so to say, all the disaster, or you're going to be able to stay centered and move forward, right? And that is so awesome. That's a beautiful thing on kind of like what you tell yourself and what you see yourself, or whether, like you said, are you a victim in there, or are you somebody, are you being the hero? And so with that is a wonderful descriptions. Thank you so much. What brings you into I know you said you talk about your background, but also your interest, and you talk about hero's journey. Is it something just fascinates you, or is it something you kind of like, as a kid, you're like, oh, this hero's journey sounds really cool, I'm going to be an expert in hero's journey? Or is it something that actually sometimes people goes through or become because of their own experience?
For me, it's been something I've been fascinated in since I was a kid. I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are interested in stories. I think the biggest industry in the world is the entertainment industry. It's gaming. It's playing as an avatar, playing as another character that's not yourself. And so I don't know if everyone sees it in the same way, but I definitely believe that everyone loves taking on characters. And when you watch a movie, your emotional response, you actually take on the emotions of the character. That's actually scientifically true. And so you feel what they feel, and you're invested into it. And so I would say, like, I think everyone's interested in this in some sort of way, but whether or not they became a study for them to understand why, and I think at a young age, I started to play around with the idea a bit, and started to play around with, like, if I act a certain way, will certain things happen to me? And if I'm good, if I'm behaving well, then this happens. If I do things out of good intention, then will something greater happen? And so, but sometimes but also when you look at the hero character, it's not immediate. It's very, it's got a like post gratification. It's not immediately that these things happen, but understanding the character that you play, it's like, well, I'll wait this out. I'll keep playing this sort of role, and hopefully something's come out of it. And I'll be honest with you, I sometimes question the character that I'm playing, or the hero archetype, because yes, it allows you to keep moving forward, which is great. But then you can also always rationalize negative things that happen to you, and move on. And so it's kind of got this double-edged sword to it, where you willingly accept chaos, you willingly accept pain and hurt, but then you continue going on. And so another way that I describe it is it's actually like an alchemical process. And so what I mean by that is if you look at science, we're all made up with like different chemicals within the body and hormones and things like that. And so when you have an external factor like chaos, you get stressed out. And so you're like, what do I do with this? And so you're now releasing cortisol in the body, stress hormones, your breath sharpens and shortens. That changes everything. Your brain the way your brain thinks, and the amount of energy that you conserve. You try to conserve energy, right? And that's what actually happens with the body. It's like you're at such a low frequency that you're conserving energy, and so the entropy starts to happen. And so what I believe that this narrative does, or this sort of framework, is it allows you to transform that in terms of alchemy, which means that you're changing the chemical structure within the body, because now you're seeing something negative through a positive lens. And so as opposed to feeling cortisol and releasing cortisol, you're now releasing endorphins, you're releasing serotonin as well. And so you're actually changing the chemistry within. And so another way I could describe it is actually what you're doing is a practice of changing the chemistry of your body, changing the energy within the body as well, through a narrative, through personal storytelling. And I think what got me interested in that was like, I just started seeing a lot of parallels. So I was studying, I think I mentioned I was studying health science and sports science. And so I was understanding the body, and I was understanding hormones and how they work. But then I was also studying writing and understanding stories. And I was like, okay, I can see how this would affect these things. And I don't think the body is just purely physical. I think we live in a purely physical world. And I was always drawn to mythology as a kid, and philosophy as a kid. And at one point in my life, and it's something I'm actually going through right now, is I wasn't true and I wasn't authentic with myself. Like I really wanted to study philosophy and psychology, but I grew up being pretty good at sport. And so I got a lot of my social affirmation from sports, and being good at moving. And so I kind of felt embarrassed by pursuing psychology and philosophy when I was getting all this attention, as a kid from sport. And so I kind of pushed that away. But in some sense, it led me now to this greater understanding of the body and the mind and the soul. And so I think part of it was because I was naturally interested, and a part of it was actually out of some sort of fear and what I was good at. But through time, I was able to marry that again and change the alchemy within myself. But I think everyone's interested in different things, and for good reason. I think we all have a different role to play. And again, if I look at it like a body, I think every single one of us are different cells within. I imagine the world as a living organism, and so each of us are a cell within an organism, like within the body. And so each of us have a certain role to play, a certain part to play. And so mine will be maybe connecting through communication, through story. And other people might be really good at science and being very detailed, and they're focusing on another thing. And so I think it's ultimately about now communicating through cells. And so looking at cancer, for me, it's the same sort of thing. It's like it's bringing back that communication to that cell, making it feel loved, making it feel understood, as opposed to distancing itself off. And so I think what we find in the body and what we find outside of our body is very much mirrored. And so you have that mathematical equation, which is like so above as below. And I think what's internal is also external. And yeah, I think it's something naturally that I've been drawn to, but I think we all understand fundamentally. I just think maybe some of us don't have time to research it. I think I had a lot of time as a kid. I've also given up a lot. I've given up a lot of career paths, because I can't sit and not think about this stuff. So I couldn't do a sales job, or I couldn't do a job where it wasn't tied to this sort of thing. And so I've been quite ignorant and quite stubborn, I guess, in this pursuit too. But for me, that ties into the hero character, ties into the hero's journey. So what would the hero do? He'd follow his heart, he'd follow his bliss. And I think I've been following that for a very, very long time. And I will hope to inspire people to do the same. And I hope that, we can kind of come back on track to doing that and doing things out of love, out of meaning, out of purpose, as opposed to what we think is right. And if we look at story itself, and I think by understanding story, I understood at a young age that that the villain in stories actually pursue things out of ego and pursue things out of logic. And so a lot of villains in movies they're the smartest person in the movie, you know. Like Scar was smarter than Mufasa, because they can do things and they can see things in ways and act in ways that a good person or a good character wouldn't act, right? And so there's a certain level of intellect with that character. And so when I was looking at this stuff, the part of myself that's tied ego, part of myself that's though it has a place, and and this is now looking at Jung's work, it's part of my shadow. I need to integrate it, but it shouldn't be the leading cause or the leading determinant of my choices. My choices should come from my heart, my creative spirit, and it should work with the logic. And if the logic takes over, which means it supersedes the love, it supersedes the heart, we tend to lose connection to the divine and lose connection to spirit. And a lot of stories will tell us this. And so I think the fascination with stories has led me onto this path.
That's so
yeah.
That is so interesting because how you say that, and I love that because it's very true. Many people, we say this earlier, many people don't realize that a lot of disease come from dis-ease inside of ourself, inside of our heart. And one thing, and like you just said just now, if it's if we are having the logic take over, it's very interesting because back in the day it was all about the physical thing, right? Everything, and now everything is like, if you go to school and everything, it's almost like we worship the mind, that we worship the logical thing, which is absolutely important. Everybody's knowing it's important, but like you said, if you let it take over and you listen to the logic and all these things and forgot your heart, that's when things become disharmony and even more.
Something interesting though that I've always thought about is that I think what's logical is the heart. It's about pursuing, because if you look at a very long-term aspect, right? You look at if I follow my heart, there's this sense of the unknown, there's a sense of potential. You don't know what's going to happen. And something that Jordan Peterson talks a lot about, which really kind of clicked, was like, if I want to live an adventurous life and I want to live a good story, then telling the truth is vital to that, because when I tell the truth, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And so truth is very integrated with the hero character. So the hero character will tell the truth. And that's when you watch a movie, you always expect them to tell the truth and to accept their flaws and mistakes and to move on, right? So that's a certain characteristic that you take on, and for very good reason. And the villain, they lie, right? But the reason that they lie is because they're afraid of the unknown, and so they want to control things. And so it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. That's not what I'm saying. It's just understanding that in these movies, they're talking about parts of you and parts of yourself, and it's the internal landscape. And so as humans, what are we doing? We're actually projecting out our human psyche into movies, into stories. And so when I watch a movie, when I look at things, it's just talking about my internal landscape and how I can overcome that. And so it's about, how does the hero defeat the villain? And it's now, when you look at these things, it's like, okay, what am I acting? What parts of my life am I acting like the villain? What parts am I lying about? What parts am I afraid of? What am I ashamed of? Looking at like cancer, a lot of these things come from that lower frequency vibration. And so it's drawing awareness to that and having the courage. And so if you look, I think it's I can't remember what it's called, but it's the frequency chart. And so courage is the very first step into positive frequency. And so it's having the courage, which is actually the value or the virtue of the hero. It's like they have the courage to confront the shadow, or to confront the unknown, and what I mean by that is the unknown parts of yourself. It's like, where does that grief come from? Where does that shame come from? You can look away from that, acting as the villain, right? It's acting as it's logic. It doesn't want to go there. It puts barriers up. Where to act as the hero is to go, okay, this is going to hurt and it's going to be very painful, but I'm going to go look at this, and my heart is probably going to ache, but you know, there's something you find out by looking at that thing that there's a part of you that's stronger than that. And so it's not that you'll get rid of chaos, it's not that you'll get rid of the hurt, it's that a part of you starts to develop over time that knows it's stronger than the grief, it knows it's stronger than the pain, and stronger than the hurt. And so you can now look at the world and look at pain in a different way, and you're better for it. And so that's how I would say that's how we heal the body, it's how we heal the mind. And something very interesting that I wanted to touch on, sorry, I can go on a couple of tangents, but was the word psychology. You know, we idolize the mind quite a bit, but even the word psychology is a misunderstanding or a misconception of the actual of what it is. And so you can tell that logic is gone. So psyche is the soul. And so psychology isn't the study of the mind. Psychology is the study of the soul. Yet we refer to psychology as the study of the mind. And so we've forgotten as a culture that, you know, we're actually studying the wrong thing, or it's not completely logical, and we don't know what the psyche is or what the soul is. And so I think that's why we've kind of shifted away from it, because it's fear of understanding, it's fear of trying to get at that point. And you need to have a very open mind and a very open heart to study the soul. And it's a very painful thing to study. And so I think that's why we've shut that off as a society, and we've become more logical, too logical that it's actually become illogical sort of thing.
I love that you've become too logical, or try to be too logical, that will become illogical. But yeah, it's very true that it is, you know, the psychology, it's a study of the soul, and at the same time the soul and where our heart is, our hearts where, you know, it's where the soul resides in there, and it's kind of like it can be a scary place to go. As a grief coach, I have many people say, oh, you know, I've been working up here all this time, I know something missing, but it's so scary to go into the heart. And
yeah, it is, it really is. And this is interesting. I spoke to my dad and my mom about this recently, because with my writing, I actually I work with a couple of different comic writers and stuff, but something very interesting was that I believe that the fractal, right? So there's chakras in the body, which is the energy pools, and this is now, you know, again, science has proven that there are different energy places within the body itself and in that alignment. And so I believe that the earth is actually like the heart chakra in the universe. And when you look at the word earth, it's actually, if you twist it around, it says heart as well. You put the H at the beginning and you have heart. And so there's something very intertwined with earth and the heart and love. And if I had to take it, my theory on this is that why are we here? Like, what is the purpose? We do this all the time. A lot of film and television and movies tell us this, but the purpose is to love. And so I don't think we can understand love without pain and without loss and without hatred and all these things in the world. And so it's only through understanding real pain and real hatred, all these qualities, and then alchemizing that, which means to now take a different perspective and actually still have love and compassion. That's true love. You know, love isn't something that's very ignorant. It's not something you just give. It's something you need to understand and work towards, and forgiveness, you know, all these sort of things. And so I think we're here to understand that. We're here to learn that. We're here to understand what love is as a species. And that is ultimately what I believe drives us. And if you have that goal or perspective on the world, I think that can be another tool to healing yourself.
That is beautiful, and that is very true. When you are able to see it differently and go back to love, as somebody who experienced grief, but some people ask me, so why you do this work? Someone who experienced grief since the age of 5. It's kind of like you making a choice. And so are you going to be afraid of the pain? Are you going to be, firstly, are you going to stay in pain? Or are you going to choose to move forward from it? And then at some point, like you said, yes, you might be experiencing pain, but it will be painful, but you choose to move through it for a greater
Cause, yeah.
results at the end for all. And so that is so beautiful. What a wonderful conversations. Thank you so much for sharing all this very cool
That's
thing.
okay.
How do you mentioned that you work with people as coach and in multiple different ways. How do people connect with you if people want to learn more about you?
I'd say probably Instagram is probably the best way at the moment to get in contact with me, or Facebook or one of those social platforms. I'm not online too much. I'm starting to become online a bit more now, hence why I'm here. But yeah, you can follow me on Out of the Caveman on Instagram, which is a play on my last name. So my last name's Cavalieri. So I've always been called the Caveman or Caveman. So I thought like, and then I was thinking like, hey, well, this is like Allegory's cave and me coming out with knowledge. And so I was like, Out of the Caveman works. It kind of, and I probably look a bit like one. So, so that's where you can find me. And then, yeah, like I have my own podcast coming out very soon called Tools for Personal Evolution. So you can also tap that in as well. And so that's where I'll be sharing a lot more of this hero's journey and narrative and different styles of training. Yeah, and so that's where people can find me.
Super. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for the wealth of wisdom and informations you just shared with us. Because we all go through life. It's like, as you said, it's not, life is a dynamic of those. And so thank you so much. And for you, our audience who are listening to this, please share one or two gold nuggets that you gain from listening to Anthony so we can continue to learn from each other and to empower each other. And please share this conversations with your friends and families, because we all, at the end of the day, the truth of life is we all go through things in life, whether it's now or in the future. And so please share these conversations with them to help them to be able to thrive even as we go through challenges. And this is Dr. BirgitteTan with International Childhood Cancer Charity, your grief specialist. And I thank you very much for joining us today. And I look forward to see you again